Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night. Yay! Yay! So it's Wednesday night teaching. I'll see if anybody's going to jump on. See what's going on. I have loved the day today. I've got so much accomplished. I had lunch with my sister Linda today. It's been a long time since we've been together. Maybe Norma can join the next time. Soon, I hope. Been chatting with Nick. We're going to do lunch Saturday. I feel like I'm coming awake and alive again ever so slowly now that the time has sprung forward and we've had some sunshiny days. All the rain and dark makes me sit and cry all the time. Arizona sounds so much better and better to me the older I get and the more seasonally depressed I become. I think, yeah, Arizona. I like the idea. Okay, if nobody's going to jump on, I'll go ahead and get started and you all can watch it later. I know it's a little late. Hey, Amanda. I was a little late because I was hey, Angie. I was kind of talking to Nick and I've missed him and chatting with a few people that I've met on other social media real quick. So, we're still going to dabble and look in the book of Esther a little bit. This story is one of my favorite stories, and there's so much that can be gleaned from her story and so much that can be learned from this book and so much information that's there that, you could read it and read it and read it, and I did read it for years, and it just turned into be a major part of my life for a long time. Even have a tattoo that was spoke. Ben Hatton used to speak it into my life all the time. You've been brought into the kingdom for such a time as this. You've been brought into the kingdom for such a time as this. And that ended up being tattooed on her shoulder. Her story just has always impacted me on so many levels. So, sometimes though, and what we want to talk about tonight is sometimes we've got to push Esther out of the limelight. To kind of look deeper into the story and then put her back in to shine more light onto the story. She is a true heroine. I'm going to get ahead of myself. But her story's not a pretty one. Not at face value, okay? Linda and I were talking today about the grittiness and the bloodiness and the brutality and the ugliness of some of the stories. And this story's pretty gritty. And sometimes it may be relatable to readers who have a rocky history of their own, okay? So, Esther went through some things. Her life is not a fairy tale. She suffered through some stuff. All right. She lived in exile. She and a significant number of the Jewish people lived scattered throughout Persia after the Babylonian exile. And although they'd been granted freedom to return to their homeland, many of the Jewish people stayed in exile rather than to go back to the war and toward Jerusalem. They stayed where they were. An exiled people. All who wander are not lost, I guess. Esther was an orphan. Scripture says she had no parents. She had lost both her father and mother and was raised by her older cousin Mordecai. That's in Esther 2:7. She was taken captive. Really look at this. That Persian king Xerxes, and I call him Jerxes, he was displeased with his wife, and he sought to replace her. So, of course, he made a decree in order to gather to himself all the suitable virgins in the region. Now listen to this. Yes, Jack, they were comfortable. Speaks a lot about today, doesn't it? A little too comfortable where they were. Don't get me started. You're about to get me preaching, boy, and you know it gets me in trouble every time. Esther 2:8 says, "So when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in the custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken to the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women." So she was taken. Esther was also taken. Now, we also... Jack, I miss you. You've got to come to Logan. Now, that's all there is to it. I just miss you. We read in Scripture that Esther was young and exceptionally beautiful. And we can also see that from the language that was used, Esther didn't have very much to say in any of the matters that unfolded. She most likely did not submit a resume or raise her hand to volunteer to be in the harem. You hear what I'm saying? She was young, she was pretty, and she was taken. Plain and simple. All right? Now here's where I'm going to get ugly. Now, a lot of you all are not going to like this. Here we go, Linda. About to go there. Esther was raped. You hear me? More or less. Now that comes as a shocker. I know. This is just my opinion. Like it or not. Boot me off Facebook. Put me in Facebook jail. Delete me as a friend. Do what you got to do. So, Scripture's clear about what happened. In Esther 2:2-14. Now listen. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with spices and ointments for women, when the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Now listen. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the custody, and I'm going to say it wrong, of Shahagaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Okay? Do you get that? The virgins, they were all quite young, were escorted to the king, and he was probably about 40 years of age at the time. They were taken one by one to sleep with him. They didn't return to the other virgins, but were added to the number of the king's other concubines, also known as sex slaves without wife status. Get me? No other man could ever be their husband, and they never saw the king again unless he was pleased with them. In short, he test drove all the models before making his purchase. And he purchased Esther to replace the former queen. Got me? Okay. My eyes, that's rape. Esther risked, and she could have been executed. So, when Mordecai learns of Haman's, the king's advisor, plot and plan to annihilate all of the Jewish people, Esther is pushed to center stage. Mordecai sends the queen a message and telling her how to throw herself before the king and beg mercy on behalf of her people. And this isn't as easy as it sounded. She knew that anyone who approached the king without first being summoned was killed, unless the king was in the mood to extend his scepter and spare their life. Now, what Mordecai was asking her to do could have easily been the last thing she ever done. Okay? But Mordecai said, "Do you not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of the other Jews? For you, if you keep silent at this time, and relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you've not come into the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4:13 through 14. It's kind of like, hello, Jewish guilt. There it is. So Esther, Mordecai, and the Jewish people fasted and prayed. And they fasted and prayed. And then Esther went before the king. Thankfully, the king held out his scepter. He heard her case and granted her requests. God used both Mordecai and Esther in powerful ways to deliver the Jewish people from obliteration. Now you got to understand this. Esther wasn't a cheerleader. That wasn't who she was. And she wasn't Mordecai's sidekick either. By spending a moment focusing on Esther as an individual and addressing the very real and horrible things this woman of God endured, we're able to see more clearly her character and her courage and God's redemptive love at work in spite of the sins of man. He chose a woman who had had everything taken from her. Everything. Does that sound familiar? Do you sometimes feel like that you've lost everything? She had lost her parents. She had lost her freedom. She had lost her virginity. And he gave her everything. He used someone, God used someone who, due to gender, culture, and circumstance, was powerless and invisible, and made her the pivotal and formidable heroine. Esther's story is so powerful, and it's a reminder that God can bring about new life, redemption, and freedom, even when it seems the most impossible. Behold, I'm about to do something new. Even now it's coming. Do you not see it? Indeed, I will make a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert. That's Isaiah 43:19. You've been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this.